That moment that you had, that was after your grandparents and the accident?
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you prayed.
Mm-hmm.
Miracles happened.
Yeah.
These grandparents that had shown you unconditional love that you'd never experienced,
Yeah.
really, from your direct mother and father.
Mm-hmm.
What part of you was calling out?
It was my soul. I just couldn't let them go. I wasn't ready to be by myself. When you come from these severe abandonment issues and feeling alone growing up, and then you get this real security, especially when you're a youth and you're trying to figure everything out. It's just, I couldn't imagine what would have happened to me had I lost that during those years. My grandfather did stay for me right until the point where he went as long as he possibly could. I realized that I was keeping him alive. My will for him to live is what kept him alive, because he didn't have the will. He was like so fed up. His body was beat up. He had been through so many operations. Even when he was told that he had just a few more months to live, he lived past another year with hospice care and everything. He became very dependent on me for his own will to live. And with me starting my company and having a baby and all of the things that were happening, my grandfather went back into the hospital. And I remember when I was starting my company, there was nights where I would sleep for 3 hours a night between my infant, my company, and then going to the hospital to be with my grandpa to put him to sleep. And then I remember when it was time for me to move to Los Angeles, it was a really crazy time because my grandpa was so dependent on me, and I moved from Sacramento to the Bay Area after I got divorced. He really didn't want me to move, but I promised him every week I would come to dinner. So then at the same time, my ex-husband's company relocated to Los Angeles, and I had a brand new office in the Bay Area. I'm like, what am I gonna do? So for 1 year, I traveled every Thursday, pretty much every Thursday on a plane to Los Angeles with my son, Nikos, flew to his dad, dropped him off, and then I would pick him up on Sunday. We flew back, and then we'd get in my car, and we'd drive 2 hours to Sacramento to have dinner with my grandpa. And this happened every week for a year. And finally, it got to the point where it's just not sustainable long-term to live that way.
No.
I was extremely drained, and I just felt like a corpse. I was just like a machine, building this company and taking care of my son. And in the beginning, I didn't really have a lot of money. After getting divorced and everything, I really had nothing. So I worked around the clock, and then I remember one day waking up and I just was so burnt out, and I was like, oh my God, I just missed like all of my passions, the things that I love, like my art and music, and I'm craving just to find like a spiritual community and all of these different things that my soul was just craving. And I remember that night I had a dream. And in my dream, Madonna was my best friend, and there was like this kind of like homeless looking monk, and they were both talking to me. And Madonna was saying to me, Brandee, everything that you do doesn't have to be so huge and grand and big. She was like, if you want to do your art, you don't have to do a huge mural. If you want to dance, you don't have to be on, like Dancing with the Stars. Mm-hmm. You can just dance, mm-hmm. Go out to dance for the night. Mm-hmm. And then I remember like the monk, just confirming everything that she was saying and like kind of just looking at me with this wisdom. And then I remember he said, just start small, and whenever you want to do something, don't put it off into the future, because there might not be a future. And I remember waking up, and just that dream was so clear, and I wrote it down, and then I made a list of all of the things, and I said, you know what, if I lose my company because I take a little time for myself to do these things, then whatever, it wasn't meant to be. So I wrote a list of all of the things that I wanted to do. And on that list, there was finding a spiritual community, getting into my dance class. I wanted to do an empowerment book for women, for single moms. I had a long list of all of these different, very specific things. And one of the things that I wrote on there, because I was wearing the t-shirt of my father when I wrote this list from his production company, and I said, you know what, I want to find one of my dad's best friends and find out what happened to him. 2 weeks later, I flew to LA, doing my normal routine. Somebody asked me to go to this random conference on my way out when I'm going to fly home. So I canceled my flight and just did it. And I had my son with me. And afterwards, I remember I was standing in the crowd and different people were coming up to me. One girl just started talking, we exchanged information, and later she introduced me to the spiritual community I was looking for. Then I don't know what it was about this one seminar, but just so many things off the list happened at this place. And all of a sudden I was looking in the crowd and I see a really familiar face, and I walked up to him and I asked him, where do I know him from? And he said, what's your name? And for whatever reason, I said my maiden name, which I never do. He started crying and he said, I was your dad's best friend. Yeah. And it was amazing because I didn't remember writing that on that list. And I remember talking to him, and he explained to me, you know, that my father was on drugs, and I never knew any of this. And he explained that my dad had called him 2 days before he committed suicide, and he said, I really need to talk to you. I'm having another baby. I'm so stressed out. Back then, without cell phones, you know, it was hard to get together. So 2 days later, he went to a payphone to call, and my grandmother answered the phone, and he asked where he was, and she said, he doesn't live here anymore. And he kept asking, well, where does he live? And that's all she kept saying, because that's her way of being strong. And he later found out that he had committed suicide, and he blamed himself for so many years. He even came back to our house years after we had moved and tried to reach my grandparents. So I reunited him with my grandparents, and he brought books with pictures we had never seen before and stories that we had never heard before. And I reached out to my stepmother with my 2 little brothers, you know, the one that wasn't born at the time, and he gave her tremendous healing as well, telling her different stories.